All right, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Wow. Either you're hungry. Good afternoon. Thank you, thank you. Can we get the last group to please take your seats so we can actually get started? We're on a tight schedule and we have quite a packed agenda. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming this afternoon to our yearly session that our friends at AGRA always organize on agriculture. This year, the theme is really to talk about sustainable business models that are required to deliver on the nexus of food systems, climate action, and jobs, so those three. And it's a bit on the back of COP28, I know some of you were there, where we're really able to start to help connect the dots between food systems and the climate action. Hey, Jennifer. And we started to help us really mobilize resources and commitments to support building resilient food systems across Africa. And we know that to do that, we absolutely need some innovative, some inclusive, and some sustainable business models. And that's why we brought all of you here together. It's a group of stakeholders from the private sector, from the public sector, and from our development partner friends who are all playing a role and leveraging such business models to help transform agriculture in Africa. And so today we have quite a packed agenda. We're going to have a few introductory remarks, and then we'll have two panels, one really private sector focused and one public sector focused, and then some closing. And then we're going to hear from some members of the audience, and we'll close. And we plan to be done exactly around 2 p.m. So to get us started, let me then invite our host today, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the president of AGRA, for her welcome remarks.
Thank you, Archer. Let me also welcome all of you here. It's really, really good to see you here. And it's good to get a different feel this year. Last year, I was actually worried that we might not see snow in Davos again. But I guess if you've been outside like I have, and you're foreign like I have, then you actually know it's working. Good. Listen, we come here at a time when we are celebrating a number of things. Food systems are beginning to be the conversation. I mean, for those of us who were in the Food Systems Summit 4 years ago, is it 4 years ago already? No, 2 years? 2 years ago. 2 years ago. We actually are gaining a lot of traction. But here today we want to talk about action and some of the stuff that we are seeing on the ground that is moving that could actually give food systems the actual momentum we are looking for. In the previous conversation, we were talking about how food systems are becoming the arrowhead of our universe. But even before these conversations, we all start with our stomach. That's why this conversation is going to be around lunch, right? So the arrowhead of our world is food systems. And the sooner we get that and start understanding that that's how our world is going to work, the better. But is it working, and how well is it working? So at AGRA, we are doing a number of things, and today is just an opportunity to share with you some of the things we are doing and what we think is beginning to work. Some of the things we are concerned about and some of the opportunities we see. One of the biggest opportunities we see, and thank you for being here, SG, is just how much Africa could build on its amazing opportunities to trade with each other. We are still we are trading at 15% in terms of food between African countries for a continent that is importing $50 billion worth of food. But the good news is that is only in 4 commodities, in rice, wheat, maize, and oil seeds. $34 billion across 4 commodities that we could actually start moving already. So what is holding us back? What has held this continent back? When we come here every year we come here, we come to look at opportunities and what we could do differently. And I'm proud to have been part of meetings here that actually led to real action on the ground. in Rwanda, where I was Minister of Agriculture, and here RDB, the chief of RDB, Francis, has been at it for some time, worked together on this. Back then, we actually got 2 businesses here that actually landed in Rwanda and are doing amazing things on the continent, I mean in the country. So let me give you an example. The first one is Africa Improved Food. So I know many of you are going to say, we've heard that story, we've heard that story. But you know what? What you didn't know is that Africa Improved Food is now purchasing from over 350,000 Rwandan farmers. Every Rwandan farmer goes to farm thinking that they are going to supply Africa Improved Food. And if you or me working in agriculture, that's the signal you need. That's the signal you want, because that farmer will go and purchase seed. That means a business like Syngenta will survive. That means that farmer will purchase fertilizers. That means a business like Yara can survive. So you start creating a business ecosystem that can survive because of one business. So that's number one. Number two, Unilever, and I'm pulling out businesses that we discussed here in this tent. Unilever invested in tea in Rwanda. And fast forward, hundreds of Rwandan farmers work with that company and are supplying in the tea sector. So we can actually get businesses to come and invest in Africa in ways that can transform people's lives, and that's why we come here every year. We have African businesses that are working. Africa is powered by millions and millions of SMEs. When we come here, we are looking for that arm up to give them power, to increase their energy. But the biggest opportunities are Middle East, and that's why today we invited USG to be part of our conversation. And I don't want to preempt what our moderator is doing, but we are really excited to have you here. So I will not talk about the things that Agra is doing, because you're going to see many of them throughout the conversations. But I just wanted to encourage you to look at how we can continue to think about this sector as the sector that gets massive amounts of people to be part of our mainstream economies. Because if we don't do that, we will move backwards. We are already moving backwards because of climate change. So today is about discussing what you've seen that works. Tell us what you know that works. We have a number of ideas around what works, and we are willing to share those, and we'll share those. But let's talk about what works and what can scale. Like I committed earlier, if your idea is better than mine, I'll pick your idea and take it to scale. Let's collaborate around how we get this work done and really do big things. So with that, let me welcome you again and encourage you to have a good meal, and hope you have a good meal. But I really wanted to appreciate many of our partners that are in this room. Agra works because a lot of people believe that Africa has the capacity to be able to deliver what it needs, and we are really proud of the partners that support that work, whether it's BMGF, and you will see the number of partners there, whether it is FCDO that works with us from a country perspective, IKEA Foundation, thank you for coming, whether it is USAID, Rockefeller Foundation, and now recently MasterCard Foundation that wants to see young people in agriculture. And if you have a great idea on how to get young people in agriculture, please, let's talk. Anyway, over to you again.
Thank you, Agnes. And I really like the focus on talking about action, what works and what we're actually doing to transform agriculture in Africa. And to do that, we actually have to do things at scale, right? We can't do it at one country, we can't do a pilot. And so it's really great that His Excellency Wamkele Mene has agreed to join us today and hopefully talk to us about what we need to do to build this one unified continent, right, of $1.3 trillion and $2.6 trillion, 1.3 billion people. So let's please welcome His Excellency Wamkele Mene, who's the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Acha, our moderator for the session today. It's a pleasure to be here with you over this lunch discussion. Madam President, I want to thank you very much for the introduction and your leadership of AGRA and your partnership. You mentioned the initiatives that you have already launched, and I'm very proud that the AFCFTA Secretariat is one of your partners, and I will speak about that. I want to also recognize the ministers in the room and yourselves, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is, again, an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. I will be very brief because I think the value of the session will be in hearing what you have to say. The AFCFTA, as you know, market of 1.3 billion people, over 3.4 trillion United States dollars, combined consumer spending and business spending, GDP. Very significant market, but also a very, very fragmented market. If you think about it, the African continent is relative to India and China in terms of population. But of course, we know there is a substantial difference in terms of competitiveness, as well as the capacity for the continent. If you look at China, India, the African continent, and the capacities to feed and to ensure food security of these countries relative to the African continent. And so that deficit is a significant challenge, but it is also an opportunity. As Madam President said, over $50 billion worth of imports of food. Africa is a net food importer, and the four commodities that Madam President mentioned really go to the heart of the challenge that we have. And there's no other example of this challenge than what happened over a year ago. The impact of the Russia-Ukraine context on Africa. Africa is overly reliant on the imports of grains from Russia, Ukraine. And that, as we all know, had an adverse impact on Africa. The importation of grains that was affected by the crisis, by the war in Ukraine, had inflationary pressures, food inflationary pressures on Africa, increases of over 30%, in some countries 35 to 40% of staple foods as a result of a crisis on another part of the world. When in fact, we do know that in Africa, there are countries that have the capacity to supply the grains that are required. I will give you an example, and this example speaks to the theme of today, and that is the models and the partnerships that we are seeking to develop. Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has 200,000 metric tons worth of grains per year that go to waste. So post-harvest wastage of over 200,000 grains. We are working with a company, a Swiss company called the Bühler Group, to see how we can identify and introduce technologies that will enable Zimbabwe to overcome this challenge of post-harvest losses, and to be able to feed not only herself, but the region and the rest of the continent. It is not inconceivable that in 5 years' time, where we get this right, the productive capacity, the supply chains, it is not inconceivable that in 5 years' time, Zimbabwe will yet again be a net exporter of grains, thereby ensuring food security on the continent as well as the region and herself. And there's an entire value chain that we are looking at, from the grains right up to food systems and production of the foods in the way of special economic zones for production of foods. Ethiopia, as we all know, last year had a significant harvest on wheat, Uganda, similar advantages that we see in terms of capacity to produce grains that are required. I mention these examples because they underscore the point. And the point is that the African continent does have the capacity to feed herself and to provide food security. Of course, there's a missing link. And the missing link has been, how do we as Africans trade in agricultural products to enable food security? Some of the highest tariffs on the African continent that constrain intra-Africa trade are on agricultural products. That is why it has been over the years much more cost-effective for many countries to import grains from Russia, Ukraine, than to import grains from Ethiopia, from Uganda, or from any other country on the African continent. And so the AFCFTA, in respect of agriculture and competitiveness in agriculture, has a singular objective of eliminating these tariff barriers that have been existing for many, many decades. We, as you know, we as Africans, since the launch of the Doha round in 2000 in Qatar, we have been saying at the WTO that developed countries must eliminate trade-distorting subsidies that distort global trade in agricultural products, ranging from cotton to grains, and this is a valid point. But it is not sufficient, as we know, to simply reduce and eliminate tariffs and eliminate trade-distorting subsidies in agriculture. We have to take a further step. And that further step is the development of these models that will enable the productive capacity to be leveraged upon in the example that I mentioned of Zimbabwe and other countries. So we have the trade rules that fortunately will be applied in the form of the AFCFTA to ensure that we reduce and eliminate these trade barriers. We have a private sector strategy that we, along with AGRA, we will be implementing to develop the agro-processing industry in Africa by leveraging on existing capacities in food and grains, agricultural production, to enable the trade that we want to see in agricultural products in Africa to take place. The third component is, of course, the private sector. We need the private sector to invest in agricultural technologies, to invest in special economic zones that are targeted at producing food in Africa for intra-Africa export and import, but also to feed the rest of the world, which I believe the African continent has indeed the capacity to do. We have been working with very important institutions to implement a range of different policies. Some of them, the policies you may be well aware of, the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program, CADAB, as well as a program with AROSO, the African Organization for Standardization, to look at these standards and norms that prohibit the export of food systems, with a view to having and establishing a harmonized system for SPS, for standards, for regulations, for food export and import. So in my view, a combined implementation of the trade rules, of models that seek to enhance, which is what AGRA has been doing for many, many years, to enhance food productivity, as well as a private sector component, is a critical model that, in the case of Zimbabwe, it seems that it shall work. And it seems that we will see the results that, that we want to see. And so, as much as today, as we speak, Africa has a food insecurity crisis, I believe that this food insecurity crisis is an opportunity. It is an opportunity for us to look at new and explore new models for how the agricultural sector in Africa can become one of the drivers of intra-Africa trade and contribute significantly to Africa's overall GDP. We do recognize the importance of agro-processing as a contributor to industrial development in Africa. I think that is very clear. We can pursue agricultural industrialization at the same time as we pursue, for example, digital industrialization in Africa. We can pursue parallel tracks for traditional industrial development, agricultural industrialization, as well as looking forward in terms of the fourth industrial revolution in digitization of Africa's economy. Recently, and I will end on this note, recently Rwanda produced a proposal to ministers of trade of Africa in Africa, and the Council of Ministers, and that proposal is aimed at identifying solutions precisely on this challenge of food insecurity and agriculture. And I'm very pleased that that proposal is under consideration. It is a proposal that will address the acceleration of reduction of barriers to intra-Africa trade in agriculture to enable Africa ultimately to be self-sufficient, to rely on herself, to create jobs for young people in agriculture industrialization, to be globally competitive in the agricultural sector. You will remember as well as I do that the former president of China, when Deng Xiaoping introduced reforms and focused also on agriculture and bringing into a continental or a country value chain, bringing into that agricultural country value chain millions and millions and millions of smallholder farmers. And when you look 30 years later, you see the impact of how China was able to lift millions and millions of people, over 700 million people, lifted out of extreme poverty as a result of a truly inclusive value chain in the agricultural sector. It's not impossible to achieve better or similar results on the African continent, but we of course have to focus on the models that will deliver the success that we want to see. So I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to share these observations with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We love the China example, and we absolutely need to replicate it in Africa. So let's talk about what that's going to take, right? So we'll get going with the panel, who will share really specific examples of what's happening on the innovation front. So please join me in welcoming my panelist, Ndidi Nwuneli, from the Africa Food Changemakers. She has many hats on. Today it's Africa Food Changemakers. Welcome, Ndidi. Barbros Korekoglu from Food from Rabobank. Barbros. Lawrence Haddad from Gain. And Marissa Suarez from Yara. You can clap for them. Okay, thank you for breaking it up. There we go. All right. Friends, I thought we would start by each of you sharing specific examples of innovations in business models that, to Agnes's point about being concrete and focusing on action, that either are you're deploying at the moment, that you've seen others deploy, that you're very excited about. So, Marissa, would I start with you?
Oh, okay, so I'll start. I think, first of all, business models that are non-inclusive, from my experience, don't work. And by non-inclusive, I mean that when we try to do it alone as an organization, bringing multiple partners together is critical to unlock true scale. And when we talk about innovative business models, innovation is nothing if it isn't adopted. Then it's just a good idea. And often we sit in the good idea space for a long time. So what we've seen a good example of this is in Tanzania, specifically on rice. We've been working with multiple partners to close a value stream loop. That means from inputs to financing to local off-takers of the product. We have scaled this to over 250,000 farmers, and it's growing. And it wasn't just Yara. It cannot be done alone, and that's what I mean by inclusivity. It's collaboration with multiple partners, from seeds to financing to local institutions to support aggregation of farmers. So I think the key learning in new business models and innovation is that it cannot be done in isolation, and it cannot be done by one single party.
Love it, and I love the very concrete example. Barbara.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, maybe I will follow up from what the metaphor that Agnes used in the last session, but also in the beginning of the session. That food systems is the arrowhead of the transitions that we need to implement. And what would it take us to get that arrowhead as fast as possible, with the greatest strength as possible, to 2030? We need to pull that bow, the bow that will struck the arrow, with our all force. A single organization like Rabobank, yourselves, we cannot do it alone. So we all have to come together and pull that bow together with our full strength, so that that arrow travels as fast as possible, right? And that is not only about private sector, but also public, philanthropy, and also non-governmental organizations, right? So we should really move from public-private partnerships to public-private philanthropic, and from that to public-private philanthropic to and non-governmental partnerships. It's really, really important. 2 examples from our side. Agriculture exchange, which we put together with our partners, MasterCard, but a few others as well, to digitalize payments in Africa. So the farmers can get access to their dues as fast as possible. And we have done great part in that, right, with Rabo and MasterCard. But now we need also support for the first mile delivery from the philanthropy sector. So can we come together to scale that forward? It is adopted already. It works on the ground. Can we scale forward? The second one is Sustain Africa. It has been mentioned that indeed after the Ukraine crisis there was the big issue of moving fertilizers from Europe and North America to Africa. Together with our partners like Yara, we put together a fund which financed the mobilization of fertilizers into Africa, into places where indeed food insecurity is perverse. Now, but what's happening is, and it's very, it's in the nature of our partnerships, it's always short term, right? A crisis brings us together, we take action, it works. We don't address the fundamental principles and reasons of that challenge, and we perceive that, yeah, on the surface that problem is solved, let's now break out. Can we, all of us, come together on specific solutions that we know it works, and instead of coming together for 1 to 3 year periods, but like until 2030, can we come together, work together, pool funding, pool knowledge, expertise, products, and do implementation work? I think we should really break the cycle of perpetual piloting, perpetual trial. It will not get us anywhere, right? 1 hectare here, 2 hectare there, it will not help us. So can we put together partnerships, public, private, philanthropic, non-governmental, and pull that bow with our full strength to shoot the arrow as far as possible and as quick as possible?
And thanks for that. And I think we'll come back to that, because I want us to talk about what it would take for us to, because I think we're all aligned that we need to do it, but let's talk about what it's going to take to make that happen. And Didi.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Agnes, for this wonderful convening. So I just said I have many hats, and I wear many hats, but I've been an entrepreneur in the food and agriculture sector for the last 16 years. And I recognized working on the African continent that so many SMEs were not only struggling to scale, they were working in isolation, often fighting with the policy landscape to really nourish their people and trade. So we created an organization called African Food Changemakers, which is about 4 years old, and we now serve entrepreneurs in 40 African countries. And this organization provides a one-stop shop: data, funding, access to markets, knowledge, training, and partnerships. to these entrepreneurs. And we've zeroed in on two areas that we're supporting them on now, which is helping them build their climate resilience and enabling them and empowering them to take advantage of the climate opportunities to serve as climate champions, because they're most affected by climate change and really have very little resources, data, and funding to address the issue. So we launched something called Brace in partnership with the Skoll Foundation, which is an e-learning platform that also has very practical field experience to enable these entrepreneurs. And we served entrepreneurs in 10 African countries, and this year we're expanding to 15 African countries. The second area we've zeroed in on is trade, and I'm sorry that His Excellency has just walked away. Because what we found is that so many of these entrepreneurs, even neighboring countries, are not trading with each other because of the barriers to trade, but the lack of data and information on what opportunities exist and who they can trade with. And through our community, we're building these platforms to enable them to trade. We've also recognized with this trading issue that there is a bias and a perception of proudly African products. Not just within Africa, which is sad that even within Africa, people think that imported products are better. So we've spent a lot of time building knowledge about our indigenous products, how effective they are, how nutritious they are, and also celebrating Africa's contribution to the global food ecosystem by changing narratives about Africa from a hungry child, which is when people think of Africa, they think of hunger. They don't think about a successful female entrepreneur. So we're actually producing content, podcasts, films, docuseries, but also curating events where African chefs can shine on the global stage. So next time we come to the AGRA meeting in Davos, we're going to have African chefs cooking this food so that all of you leave with that perception. But the key findings from my work, which have enabled me to really gain perception of what it requires to scale this work, we've talked about partnerships, but the second is the power of data. Because the perception by many international partners is that there are gaps in Africa. I have to come in and help. But there are SMEs everywhere. Even in war-torn countries, there are people on the ground. So how do we work with them instead of displacing them? How do we partner with local organizations to deliver the impact we want? If we don't change our mindset around that, we continue to move backwards instead of forward as a continent. The second is scale. And Agnes talked about it earlier today. We need work at scale. And we need to scale what works. And our work is showing that there are pockets of innovation and excellence. And we need to celebrate them, we need to amplify them, we need to fund them, and we need to learn from them to replicate them in other countries. And I'm happy to partner with many of you to do that, because I think the SMEs are the lifeblood. The young people driving this innovation understand technology, understand how to leapfrog, and they're braced for a future that we deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jida. Let's come back to the scale point, because it's something we see across all sectors, right? Not just in the ag food space, but we need to really talk about what it's going to take to address that. So over to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Agra and Agnes, for organizing this and hosting it. GAIN, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, our mission is to make healthy diets more accessible, especially to people on lower incomes. Mainly in Africa, Asia, and Southeast Asia. So I want to tell you about a very specific project. So GAIN is about connecting food systems and nutrition, and about connecting the public sector and the private sector. So I want to tell you about a project, it's a big project in Kenya, called Vegetables for All. Now we know, and we were invited by the government of Kenya to get involved in this program. We have a big office in Kenya, lots of partners in Kenya. And we were asked to get involved because the Kenyan government is very worried about the low consumption of vegetables. Most Kenyans consume vegetables, but they consume very low amounts of vegetables. So we worked with a couple of Kenyan universities to do, first of all, as you said about data is very important. Don't just assume why people are consuming low amounts of vegetables. By the way, vegetables and fruits are responsible for 25% of all the burden, all the disability-adjusted life years, the burden of disease in every country, including Kenya. The studies showed that it's not affordability, which we thought might be one of the issues, but there are actually three things. First thing was worries about safety. A lot of vegetables Worries about, are they grown in sewer water? Are they washed with sewer water? Are they doused with pesticides and insecticides? Second worry was the vegetables are all very tired when we get them. They're not really fresh. They're kind of fresh, so they don't look very appealing. And the third thing is they're vegetables. They're sometimes not very tasty. They're not framed as being very tasty. So we developed a program with all of our partners, including the government, that had three features. The first was, let's go to the main place where vegetables are sold in Kenya to low-income communities, rural and urban, and that's the mama and mbogas, right? The stalls at the side of the road. There are literally one or two people running them. Sometimes a mother is there with a baby in hand selling vegetables. Ask them, what's stopping you from getting access to fresh vegetables and affordable vegetables? And it's supply side worries, supply side problems, bottlenecks. I can't get aggregation. People tell me this is there's no pesticides, but there are lots of pesticides on it. Second problem was there's no demand. How do we build demand? How do you valorize vegetables? How do you make them look different, feel different, taste different? How do you change the narrative around vegetables? And the third thing was the government policies are not enabling. Ag R&D in vegetables, virtually nil. Virtually very little incentive to get vegetables into school feeding programs. Procurement policies are skewed towards staples, not to vegetables. So we're working with all of these fronts, on the demand side, on the supply side with the mama and bogas and market facilitators who are connecting the producers to the mama and bogas, and with the government to say, how can you create an enabling environment for the private sector to stimulate this, and how can you create an enabling environment for consumers as well? All three of those things come together. We're a year and a half in to a 5-year program. It's targeting 5 million Kenyans. We hope it'll improve the consumption of 1 million Kenyans with vegetables.
Very exciting, very exciting. First, please join me in welcoming Honorable Tony Blair to the session. Thank you for joining us. And before handing over to Agnes and you, wanted to at least hear from the panel. We've heard amazing and very inspiring examples. You've heard about rice in Tanzania. We've heard about vegetables in Kenya. Heard about the food change makers. We've heard about fertilizers, ag exchanges. But again, they're very focused, right? So what would it take as we talk about scale to make a real difference? Love to hear from each of you. What are some, maybe the challenges, but more importantly, what's it going to take for us to see rice across Africa? Right, or see vegetables beyond Kenya across Africa? What would it take to scale? Maybe I'll start with you, Marissa.
Oh, there's a few things, but I think the most important thing is when you think about scale, technology is a critical component of that. And I'm glad you mentioned data, and His Honourable Excellency mentioned harmonization. I think to truly scale, we need to leverage technology and digital connectivity. At mass with millions of smallholder farmers. How do we transform the food systems into a regenerative space, sustainable food production? You cannot do that without connecting with the farmer, his field or her field, and the crop. But today, we don't have a standard when it comes to data. We don't have a harmonized language when we talk about farmer, field, and crop. And I think that, that is the first step that we need to get in place, is really understand that specific field. Today, we all work on that field. The farmer works on that field. Our people on the ground work in the field. The governments work with that field, but no one can link that field, all the layers of data with that specific field to truly make an impact over time, to have that visibility and traceability. So I think that's the first step, is creating that. I think we have partnered with some partners and a company called VADA to create a unique field ID as a common address that everyone can use when it comes to talking about Mary's Field. This is what it is. And then you can layer significant amounts of data that's not just about the crop. You can layer data about who the farmer is, what the yield is, the soil type, the soil health. You can even layer data about the health and nutrition of that specific field or farmer. Today, that harmonization doesn't exist. We have no visibility and it's super fragmented. So any efforts to scale become really challenging. And us as partners to come together with governments and actively invest and drive scale, which comes at significant cost, is super difficult if we don't have that visibility and that data in place and a common language.
Got you. Technology and data, I love it.
100%.
Barbara.
I think it would be great if we can identify the solutions that work on the ground, that are initiated either by individual companies, organizations, or collectively. Identify those emerging solutions. It could be tech, but also policy innovations, organizational institution innovations. Identify those solutions and create a drawdown project for food systems in Africa. Identifying what is the climate impact of that, what's the nature impact of that, what's the livelihood impact of that. And if we can put value against those impacts per solution, I think we can find a lot of alliances, and then we can put our money where our mouth is, right? So that will be very important, I think.
All right, identifying these solutions. Ndidi?
Yeah, so building on the policy and data piece, that's why technology platforms and enabling technology platforms from the get-go are critical, and that's why African Food Changemakers is a technology-driven platform. But I'll say beyond that, we really need policy alignment within our countries and policy action. I love what AGRA is doing through policy and influencing governments, because what we often see in many of our countries is one step forward, two steps back. And I'll be honest that with the advances in agriculture and food systems, we haven't seen that equal embrace in the public sector and at the state levels in many of our countries. And with every new administration, it's almost like they're bringing a new template when we already have wonderful templates to build on. So I'd love to see a lot more direct engagement on policy and holding our governments accountable to create an enabling environment for SMEs to thrive. Because without the food processing SMEs on the ground and farmers scaling as SMEs, we're going to see more of the same challenge. Beyond policy, the second thing is we really need to brand sourced in Africa. We've come up with an idea, and I'm putting it out there in the ecosphere of an emoji that says sourced from Africa. Good food sourced from Africa, so that we, on our continent, whenever we see a box of chocolates on the shelves in Switzerland and it says sourced from the soil of Africa, you know that an African farmer has benefited. And so we're looking for partners in this room and externally to say, let's partner to raise the pride in African food, because that will, and ensure that that value trickles down to the farmer. Right? Not just to the processor somewhere in Switzerland or in the United States. And if we can brand our food proudly African and ensure that it's healthy and it's traced in a climate sustainable way that meets the needs of Africans, I think we can move forward with scale. Thanks.
Policy alignment and source from Africa brand. I love that. Lawrence.
Compelling, very compelling.
Last word to you.
So, policy, very key. The example I gave you about 1 million Kenyans and improved their diet and 5 million reached. Why isn't it 50 million and 10 million? We could do that through policy links in Kenya. Markets are obviously very important scalers. If something works, people want to emulate it and copy it and make money out of it, and they should. But I think the best scaler is success. Right? If something is successful, it will be scaled and copied. That's why we have to really tell stories about things that work. And I've been doing this for a while now, and I'm constantly surprised at how fashions rise and fall. Social protection was a big thing. It went down again. Now it's back up because of COVID. School meals are a big thing now across nations. If this idea that school meals can be a procurement vehicle for vegetables for kids, that could take off. That could be in 20 African countries within 5 years. So I think there are lots of scalable opportunities. We've got to be on the lookout for them and build them in right at the beginning, not at the end.
And nothing like success. On that note, please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you, everybody. And I'll now invite Agnes back
to the stage.
Thank you, Acha. So, thank you again, and what a great panel. Thank you. It was really great listening to you all. Let me take this opportunity to invite Your Excellency to join me here, because we have we know your time is very short, and we are going to ask you just 2 questions. This is a team and a group of people that cares about Africa and what's happening in Africa. So we are not global, we are Africa. So that's the first step to start with. But AGRA works with the Tony Blair Institute, which institute has for quite some time now been working with different countries in Africa to support leadership on moving several things forward. I was very, very privileged to have worked with the Tony Blair office in Rwanda as a Minister of Agriculture, and came to appreciate how the Institute tries to support countries to understand some of the things that are dysfunctional, from getting the public-private environment to work, but also getting public institutions to work. So we've stayed working with you all, and we are very happy to be working with you. So one of the things we wanted to know from you is this journey of supporting African governments to be on top of the public good, the good that will make private sector happen, the good that gets our economies to get to work. Fast forward, we have climate change, we have all these challenges. It gets even more difficult to get that work going. So, but what are the 2 to 3 things that give you hope? What's the cause for hope in this Middle East? What do you see working?
Okay.
And thank you again.
So first of all, Agnes, thank you very much for having me here, and thank you all for the work you're doing. I know in various different ways and in different fields to improve agriculture in Africa. So my institute works with governments to help them make change, because many of the things that will create a successful agricultural sector depend on government action, as you've just been hearing from the panel. And essentially, the things that we have learned in the work that we do now in many different countries in Africa are the following. The first thing is, one of the things I always say to the leaders that I work with in Africa is, what you should do is not actually very complicated to see. It's having the political will to do it. And a lot of the things that governments should do in order to improve the agricultural sector are things that they should do in any event that will improve the quality of business, of small business in their government, like predictable rules, like consistency of policy, like making sure that there's the absence of corruption, like making sure that where there are subsidy payments to farmers, those subsidy payments actually reach the people that they need to reach. So some of the things are very basic around just how government functions. And then there are other things that are being worked on now by many governments, which are to do with trade and the reduction of trade barriers, which is also very important for the development of the agricultural sector. But in the end, the problem for most African countries is that it's an enormous source of employment. There are many, many smallholder farmers. And the question is, how do they improve their productivity? How do they get connection to markets? And how are they helped be part of a wider sector in which you're not just producing raw material, but there's processing happening as well. So we work on how we bring in agri-processing investment in many different countries. And we also work on how we improve the agricultural yield. And again, many of the things that are done here are pretty obvious and are being done around the world. So, I always say to people about government that, first of all, it's the one really important position of leadership that you put people who are totally unqualified into. No one, often people will end up as an agricultural minister or as a prime minister or a president, and I mean, whatever they're qualified in, it's probably not agriculture or running multi-billion-pound budgets. And what I say to the government leaders is someone somewhere around the world is doing what you need to do, so you can learn from it. It's not as if people haven't been doing things in the agricultural sector that are innovative and successful. They are around the world, and indeed in Africa. So how do we learn those lessons and how do we apply them? But the other thing I would say, which is the most optimistic thing, is I honestly do think that technology is going to provide an enormous possibility of acceleration. And we work now in several countries on agricultural data, which we've just been talking about. This is of vital importance. And it's intimately linked to the climate issue, because then you can give people information about what's happening in climate, what they're likely to experience. And here, in my view, what is absolutely essential is for governments to introduce the digital infrastructure and digital backbone that their countries will need. It's also a critical thing for the transfer payments that people make, because one of the things that, for example, has been successful in India is the use of the digital identity system in order to transfer money direct through from government to the individual smallholder farmer. And you cut out, frankly, a lot of corruption doing that. So there are lessons that you can learn today, and the purpose of what we try and do is to say, here are the lessons, and here's how you go about implementing them. But I think we could be about to embark on actually a very productive and exciting era in this field of African agriculture if we take the right decisions.
No, that's great. So are you seeing enough momentum behind the digital work and the technology work that you've started? Because that's the new focus of your institute, and that seems to be one of the biggest gaps, especially when we look at just how that infrastructure could create opportunities for young people.
Yeah, I think so, because I think it also helps educate people. So one of the things that the world today works through connectivity, and also people, when they, you're a smallholder farmer, you come from a generation of smallholder farmers, you may be doing things in the same way that they've been done for a very long time. You need to know what's happening in the world, and you need to know what the potential is. And also there is to reference the idea of sort of stamping produce made in Africa. I mean, there is an interest in Africa and an appetite in the rest of the world to consume African products. And but it requires both governments to work on this and introduce the types of policies they need. But I also think it requires the continent as a whole to take certain decisions. This is where the Africa Union is only just now, I think, starting to, to build the muscle that it needs in order to try and help different countries develop, and also, as I say, for example, in things like trade, to be able to reduce some of the barriers, to be able to create greater connectivity. And here's where the other things matter. The infrastructure matters. We're now engaged in introducing satellite into several different African countries in order to reduce connectivity, because if you're trying to connect through fiber optics, very remote rural areas, it's difficult and highly expensive. And although many governments promise to do it, often it doesn't really happen. So there's satellite, there's obviously the road infrastructure, there's the port infrastructure. So all of these things need to come together, and there are lots of opportunities for cooperation across national boundaries, and we should take those opportunities. So I think the reason we work on government, just to say this, is that when I was 10 years Prime Minister of a developed country, UK, but I found the hardest thing about government is getting anything done. I always say to people, I sat in Downing Street, and having won a large election victory, I kind of thought, well, I must be the most powerful person in the country, and I suppose in a sense I was. And I thought that if I sat there in that room, in the cabinet room in Downing Street, and took a decision, that something would happen. And then after a time, I realized nothing happened. Right. And so we then developed a whole set of things around implementation. And I think one of the biggest things we need to get with African governments is to understand this thing doesn't happen because you've got a policy and a manifesto. You know, I often talk to presidents and prime ministers, and I say, what are your priorities? They list a whole lot of things. And I say, those aren't policies, they're just ambitions. And, you know, ambitions are easy to have. You've got to have policies, and then you've got to implement. So I think, but I see a new generation of African leadership coming in now, and I'm much more confident today than I was when we started this journey with you in Rwanda 15 years ago.
Very good. We've heard all your optimism. Is there one thing you're worried about that keeps...
It's not one thing. There's a lot of things, but...
the one thing. Okay, and then we'll let you go.
I think that the one thing... I'm fed up of hearing the word potential in relation to Africa.
So what should replace the word potential?
It's happening.
Okay. Good, very good.
Okay,
thank you so much. I know you have to...
But I wanted to come in and...
No, we really appreciate. I know you have to run, but we really appreciate you stopping by and talking to this community. We are all trying to make it happen. So that's the one thing we definitely share now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for that intervention. Let me now invite Honorable Francis Gatare, the CEO of the Rwanda Development Board. I like this idea of us standing versus sitting, so why don't you and I can stand and continue this conversation. We heard from the private sector. We had an amazing discussion with the private sector. Now Francis is our public sector representative, right? And so let me start with, we heard amazing examples of innovation, right, from many of our private sector leaders, but we also heard about some of the challenges they face in scaling, right? So again, if you put your hat on, you've been in, across multiple roles in the public sector, how do you react to that? And in particular, what can be done? What can the public sector do to help scale these innovations?
Thank you very much, Archer. I want you to excuse my voice. It's climate change in Davos effect. Let me give the context of Rwanda. I think it makes more sense to do that. Rwanda is a country that recognized very early on, before a lot of people were talking about climate change effects on agriculture. Rwanda realized very early on how much our agriculture sector was sensitive to climate, and increasingly to climate change, because of the nature of our country, the density of population on land, the nature of the terrain on which we cultivate our crops, and the increasing reduction in productivity of agriculture. Production. And so, and also the profile of the farmers, predominantly smallholder farmers, increasingly subsistence, but with a little surplus to the markets. And so with that background, scaling was always a challenge, because as Mr. Blair was saying, many people would have learned farming from the generation of farmers before them that taught them how to farm. And so from that background, our view was to try and change the nature of agriculture if we were ever going to achieve scale. And one of the transformational things that we attempted to do, which is actually now happening, not the potential, but what's happening, is what Dr. Kalibata introduced when she was still Minister of Agriculture. Land consolidation. Yeah, the concept of land consolidation, that you may have a lot of smallholder farmers across the hills, each owning their own small plots, often growing a variety of different crops, not related to each other, and therefore scaling at every single one plot was difficult. And the idea was, what if we consolidated the land without changing ownership. And then everyone can grow the same crops next to the others who are growing the same crops. And eventually, over several square miles, we could actually achieve a large-scale crop of maize, of beans, or potato, or whatever the case may be. That was, in our view, a very innovative way to create scale. The other one was to realize that, look, we are not going to change the nature of the small farmer profiles. However, we can actually have a dual approach. You have the smallholder farmers and also introduce an opportunity for medium to large scale commercial farmers. And so government invested in identifying new areas that we could actually put infrastructure in that would attract large commercial farmers, and we put incentives in place that people could begin to do agriculture as a business. Yeah, because most people initially were doing agriculture as a way of living, to get food for the family and sell the surplus, often during season, and then they run out. Lastly, we had to introduce a mechanism for storage. Yeah, storage both for the smallholders as well as the larger ones. So this is where government built a number of so-called strategic reserve areas where we could buy during season when crops are cheap, when farmers usually would sell and then they run out, and then it would be made available on the market when it's off season, especially for the dry crops. Yeah, that was later on transferred to a commercial operator called the East Africa Commodities Exchange, established in Rwanda to commercialize that kind of initiative. And so, as a result, we were able to transform the profile of the smallholder farmers. The other initiatives, of course, with respect to, you can scale up productivity without scaling up land, right? And so government was increasingly realizing that as land becomes old and tired, it requires better inputs, whether it's fertilizer, whether it's seeds and methods of farming, so that the output per acreage increases. So all these are a combination, a menu of policies that government saw as potential for increasing productivity and therefore scaling up, sometimes without scaling the acreage necessarily.
So love all these examples again of innovation, right? So maybe one last question to you is, what would it take to then scale these beyond Rwanda? How will it take to replicate this at scale across the continent?
I think that's a question beyond my pay grade. Look, I think the most ridiculous thing about Africa is the disintegration and the fragmentation of our markets and the borders cutting across families. There is no country in Africa that doesn't have a border sort of cutting between families, some on one side and others on the other. People that naturally relate to each other in language, in culture, and in business. So I think the biggest constraint for that is really to eliminate the artificial borders and the control that politicians have on their population, preventing them from trading and relating with each other freely. The attempt that some have made to create regional economic blocks, remove visa restrictions, create customs unions, and regional economic integration efforts. These are policies in the right direction, and nothing short of that can actually make that happen, because in essence, it's the border that is the problem.
Exactly, and that brings us back to the CFTA. But thank you very much, Francis. Thank you for that intervention. Really appreciate it. As we wrap up, I know we have 3 interventions from the audience, so quick ones. Let me call Monica Les from Bayer Foundation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Real pleasure to be here today on this very important discussion. So my name is Monika Lessel from the Bayer Foundation. And the Bayer Foundation, we have the goal to support social entrepreneurs in the field of health, nutrition, and climate, with a special focus also on Africa. And another area that is or focus area are women, and because we really believe women are key change makers. And that's why we have also initiated a program called Women Empowerment Award, where we honor and support women entrepreneurs in Africa and now even in the global south. And I just give you maybe 2 examples, as time is already running short. So one of them is a company called Agritech Analytics. It has been founded by a young woman, Angela Gianchi, and she has developed together with partners IoT sensors that the farmers can put on their field, and she can use that data and also satellite data to give early warnings for pests, or they also measure humidity of the soil and so on, so to improve productivity for the farmers. So it's very successful. She's now expanding the business, and it's one building block, of course, in a whole ecosystem that is needed. And speaking about ecosystems, allow me to mention another initiative. We have also partnered up with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to support AgriFin. This has been founded by Mercy Corps, and this is a whole platform and ecosystem for farmers in Africa, which supports on one hand with weather information, access to banking, access to training, technologies, and so on. And the goal of this whole initiative is to improve the life of 5 million farmers, so it's really substantial, to improve their income, and at least 40% of them women. Yeah, so these are kind of more bigger initiatives we are engaged in. And of course, also all the winners of the Women Empowerment Award and others, we are connecting. And it's not only us, we are here working with the Schwab Foundation. We are working also with Agnes and her institution. So it's really how can we bring together, how can we collaborate to drive the innovation that has been born in Africa and it is made for Africa, because that's also very important for us. It's not opposing something, but it's really how can we support that entrepreneurial spirit in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you for those examples, Monica. Simon O'Connell from SNV.
Yep, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you, Acha, very much for pushing us to answer that question. How do we accelerate progress, and how do we scale things? So I was going to try and be memorable and be alliterative with 3 Ds, but of course, people much more brilliant than me, and Didi and Tony Blair, you came up with the D of data, and then Tony Blair, the D of digitalization, which, you know, of course, is fundamental to that scaling element. But digitalization, I would just add that word inclusivity to it. I think digitalization without a focus on inclusivity doesn't get us to where we need to. My 3 Ds are defragmentation, deflagging, and de-risking. And by defragmentation, I particularly, so 3 Ds to try and be memorable, defragmentation with the development finance institutions, again, another D, but I think at times perhaps the DFIs lose too much sight. I don't know if we have any DFI representatives in the room, but lose sight of the D of the DFI and overly focus on the FI side. At SMV, we're in the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. It's going to pretty significant scale. It's about 360 million euros now. Lawrence, to your important point around horticultural produce in Kenya, we have enabled one investment in a company called Soko Fresh. That's a country where 50% of horticultural produce doesn't make it to market, but we need those DFIs and then us as implementers to defragment and to work better together. Too much competition amongst the DFIs. The deflagging, I often say this within the context of organizations like SNV, we put our flag too high, there's too many of us, we're too fragmented, we need to take our flags away. But I think Agnes and others, the point around regional trade linkages, and if I may, something like Global Gateway to Europe, a 300 billion euro commitment. There's too much focus on the Europe to Africa or Africa to Europe and not enough around the regional linkages. So deflagging within those regional contexts so that you strengthen that or those regional integrations. And then the last one, the de-risking. Frankly, if you build the better partnerships, if you do defragment, then you inherently de-risk, and that's what we need to do more of. Thank you very much.
Perfect. The 3 Ds. Thank you. Dan Wensing from IDH.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks, Agnes, for the invite, and really good to be back in Davos with so many known friends and colleagues. So, borrowing from Simon, I actually came up with 3 M's. So we need markets, and a lot of that has been discussed before. We need SMEs, and we need money. And with those 3, we can then really get it done, as Mr. Blair said, and many of us have been working on already for such a long time. And to make the 3 M's, tangible, I would like to mention an example of an alliance that we started back in June last year, called the Southern Africa Food Alliance. This is an alliance that really brings and starts from the market. So we have big brands that manufacture for Southern Africa out of South Africa. We have retailers. We have the companies that are actually supplying to these brands and to the retailers that really work, with the SMEs, and in the end, the SMEs as aggregators for the farmers. So to basically the block farming model from Rwanda that was just mentioned, the same model also in Southern Africa. So we have the market, we have the SMEs, and we're now working also very actively with the financial sector in South Africa and beyond to really invest in these entrepreneurs, both the SMEs but also very much in the farmers. And by bringing that together, we actually also deliver on that other component that was mentioned a lot also on the panel, which is the link to government. So we are linking to the agenda of the government of South Africa that has also said, we actually need to be able to produce our own food, and we are able to actually produce for our neighbors. So that is the ambition. It's an alliance. So everyone who is active in Southern Africa, please contact us so that we can really grow this and scale it. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you very much. So that was the main program. As we close, we do have a short video. So I know some of you have to run. We'll have a short video which showcases some of the work AGRA has done. So before we show it, I'll just say thank you very much for attending. Looking forward to moving beyond potential. I was actually going to tell the Honourable Prime Minister that as McKinsey, we have a breakfast we have a lunch on Thursday, and the title of the discussion is From Potential to Prosperity. So we're really trying to move away from potential. So if you want to discuss that, please join us Thursday at noon. But thanks again for being here with us, and enjoy the rest of your Davos stay, and let's play the video. Thank you.
In the heart of Africa, where agriculture is not just a way of life, but a lifeline for millions of the populations, AGRA, with its Piata partners, has been pioneering innovations that are impacting the lives of smallholder farmers across the continent. In Africa, AGRA is on a mission to catalyse a food systems transformation. The goal is to reduce hunger, improve nutrition, and enable climate adaptation. Through innovative approaches, AGRA is addressing the complex challenges faced by farmers, aiming to boost sustainable productivity and profitability while protecting the environment. AGRA works with partners to build an ecosystem of agribusinesses around farmers, facilitating last-mile service provision, and creating viable business opportunities within targeted food chains. The Agribusiness Consortia seeks to take businesses to rural communities and increase choice to farmers. This integrated model has proven to lower cost of reaching the smallholder farmers, contributing to improved access to markets, affordable inputs, and increased productivity and incomes. The Agribusiness Consortia has supported 23 integrated agribusiness consortia across 7 countries: Ghana, Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, Tanzania, Mozambique, and Ethiopia, reaching 3.7 million farmers and 5,000 SMEs. The consortia catalyzed over $660 million additional private sector investment that enhanced farmers' access to finance, input and output markets. Over a 4-year period, 2.7 million farmers had access to predictable and structured output markets, where they sold 4.4 million metric ton of crops valued at $1.15 billion. Another game-changing initiative is the Value for Her platform, designed to empower and uplift women in agribusiness. This platform offers women entrepreneurs equal access to markets and finance. The Value for Her platform offers women to women mentorship, women to market, women to finance, women to know-how, and women to technology. Value for Her platform has impacted over 4,900 registered women-led agribusinesses. It's spread in 42 countries in Africa, and majority of women agribusiness have an annual turnover ranging from $20,000 to $100,000. Malawi Agribusiness Incubation Center, MAIC. This initiative focuses on providing inclusive financial services to smallholder farmers, unlocking their potential and driving economic growth. Meet Peter Mawindo, an enterprising agri-dealer whose unwavering passion and innovative spirit have not only propelled his business to new heights, but also transformed the lives of countless smallholder farmers in his community. Peter's accessed ZMW 19 million, $1.1 million from MAIC. This resulted in an expanding customer base, which now exceeds 21,000 loyal buyers. Question: what would it take to reach more Peters in Africa? More innovations and partnerships in irrigation, regenerative soils enhancements, last mile deliver are proving to be more increase the visibility of the hidden middle. To achieve a food and nutrition secure Africa, a lot of innovations have been proven with AGRA and partners. Your commitment to collaborate with AGRA to achieving a carbon negative agriculture and build the food systems we desire is possible. Through innovation, collaboration, and urgent investments, a food and nutrition Africa is within reach.